Can you give me an example of that, of something that curbs freedom of speech?
Yeah, sure. Like, for example, we're not allowed to call the thing we plug into our computer anymore a master drive, or we're not allowed to talk about a master bedroom or a master bathroom, because it can sometimes make some people feel as though that those words are somehow connected.
Okay, and welcome to I Don't Speak German, episode 95. Except that I'm not allowed to say welcome anymore because it's probably culturally insensitive, isn't it? And I shouldn't say podcast anymore because I don't know, casting, that's got sort of implications, you know. And I actually shouldn't be speaking at all because, of course, I've got an English accent, and that's offensive to people who were conquered by the British. And I'm speaking English, of course, which is the conquerors, the colonizers' language. So I'm not allowed to. So, but I mean, by doing this, I'm putting myself at grave risk of being arrested, really, because I'm doing all these things that are actually illegal now. You're not allowed to do this anymore.
You're going to get thoroughly canceled, which means you will soon have a show on Fox News.
Yeah.
And a Substack.
That seems to, well, no, there seem to be two kinds of canceling, don't there? There seem to be the kind of canceling where you get a show on Fox News and a Substack and a podcast with a great many more downloads than we get, and book deals, etc., etc. And then there's the kind of canceling that, I don't know, it's a different kind of canceling where, you know, you do something fairly innocuous, but you do it from the left, or you do it as a trans person.
Like if you're a trans person, calling out behavior at Netflix, you know, you get canceled. And by canceled, I mean fired.
You actually get fired. But you know, we're talking about
which
serious.
It's not at all unusual for Netflix, to be clear. Like they have an active firing culture. Like you are expected to defend why you're at your job, basically every single day you're at work, which is nightmarish and awful. And the whole of employment in North America is moving in that direction. So congratulations. Yeah.
It's the wave of the future. I mean, I know it's not as serious or as important. I know that, but it seems to be their attitude with their shows as well, doesn't it? They seem to just, you know, every show they make gets fired, so to speak, cancelled even after a couple of seasons. So here's this new show, fall in love with it. Do you like it? We've cancelled it because it didn't get enough viewers.
No, Netflix has their own, like, you know, revenue model where they basically just like they've looked at it and said, well, viewership falls off after season 2, so we make 2 seasons of everything.
We make 2 seasons, and then and you know, there's one show out of every 100 that we make where it gets mega viewership, and we'll continue making that one. But all these other shows, some of them even interesting. You want to see more of that? No, fuck you. Anyway.
This is the whining
I haven't
about
got an
Netflix.
axe to grind or anything. You know, this isn't personal. There's not anything in particular in my mind. Never mind.
Is there a particular show you're bemoaning right now? Because I honestly have no fucking clue. It's been so long since I've like actively watched any Netflix. You know. But
actually, no, there isn't a particular show. I just thought it would be funny to pretend that there was a particular show that I was really, really upset about.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Can you hear what's going on behind me? Can you hear the crying outside the door?
I just heard it just as you asked me. Yes.
I'd better go and open the door.
Probably, yeah.
You'll excuse me.
Yeah, fair.
This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. Okay.
All right.
So yeah, And
Cat's doing well. Is that?
Yeah. As listeners will know, I often open these episodes with a quote from Shakespeare, whimsically. Not allowed to do that anymore. Shakespeare banned, illegal.
Yeah.
It's an old dead white European. They're now illegal. You're not allowed to. And so on. More satire. So James Lindsay 2, Grievance Studies 2.
Well, technically, this is James Lindsay like 2.5.
Yes, 2.5. Yeah.
Technically, our third strict James Lindsay episode, but it's really just a continuation of 94. So definitely, we're not going to go back and re-explain all that. We're just going to continue on and assume that you've listened to definitely 94 and most likely 87.
Yeah.
So,
we're calling this 95 because we're not getting into. I refuse to get into sort of numbering complexities, but think of it as 94 part 2. And if you're listening, frankly, look, if you're listening to this, you know what we mean, so it's fine.
It's fine.
Okay, so
all right, so we're going to continue on. We're going to keep talking about these grievance studies papers. Again, I'm not going to summarize too much, but this was where these 3 dipshits decided to write a bunch of fake papers, hoax papers, and got some of them published or accepted, and it became a giant media thing because people are dumb, but the media is complacent,
is very stupid.
There's a right-wing noise machine that suddenly everybody has to pay attention to, and that's where we are. So
I just love the idea of James Lindsay, a man whose job now is basically complaining on Twitter, criticizing other people for having grievances. That's just chef's kiss, really, seriously.
Calling a Jewish doctor, Dr. Lampshade.
Oh yeah,
and then going like, "No, I was referring to Ed Gein. That wasn't anything about." Like, no, why would you think I was referring to Nazis? Yeah, no, that's
well-known widespread cultural touchstone that everybody's heard of, Ed Gein. That's obviously what everybody's mind was going to go to first.
I'm telling you, that's one where I saw that and went like, I don't even know what the thing he's trying to say is. Right. Like, he's obviously playing with language. He's obviously kind of like being an edgelord here and wanting people to call him a Nazi. I don't know what the other read of it is. We're normally like, I'm very good at knowing what the other read is, but that was one that just completely, and the fact that he's like, no, I was calling him a serial killer. And it's like, no, that really doesn't track. Like,
no, it doesn't connect with anything.
And Lampshade, like calling him a psycho would be maybe you could, but to reference like lampshades for Ed Gein, like that's not even like the most obvious thing about Ed Gein.
No,
dead mother. Anyway, but yeah, we're talking.
I think I said at the time, but I really do think that was all deliberate. Like, I don't want to give Lindsay like Machiavellian cred or anything like that. But I really do think that he plans this out, and he knows what he's doing when he says shit like this. He knows that he's going to provoke the reaction where people say, "Hang on the fuck a minute, you're talking about a Jewish doctor and you're talking about lampshades. That's disgusting." And he knows that he can come back at that with, "Oh, I see, the woke cancel culture CRT snowflake left. You're not even allowed to talk about lampshades anymore without being called a Nazi. I didn't mean that." He knows what he's doing, and it's so pathetic. It's like that woman that weird woman on Twitter recently that started talking about burning her kids' Pokemon or something to trick people into thinking that. Of course, there
was a trick there. I think I missed the second part of that. Then, did she come back and say like, "Oh, I was just joshing the whole time. I just wanted to get a rise out of the woke left or whatever"?
She was doing exactly what Lindsay does, because if you go down her feed to earlier tweets, she's talking about, "I'm going to say something incredibly outrageous to trick people into thinking that I psychologically abuse my kid." It does look legit. Like, she says in advance she's going to do it. And then she does these tweets about, "My kid doesn't eat at school. I burn his Pokemon." And people react, including me, with, "What the fuck?" And then she's like, "Oh, I tricked you," which is a wow, point well made. Well done. But,
and even the sign that you're like making those kinds of jokes, even that's in your head at all, probably a sign you should probably still get visited by CPS, right? Like,
exactly. It worries me that you have a child when you
Right.
even, these
Exactly.
things can even occur to you, and you think that's a worthwhile, making strangers think that you're psychologically abusing that child is something that you thought would be a good use of your time as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And
This
also, this isn't like, just sorry, we're off on our own little thing here, but like
Really?
this isn't even like, there are like parents who do exactly this sort of thing to their children.
Yeah.
Like this isn't like out of this actually becomes relevant, when we get back to talking about these papers, because, the whole point that we've been talking about with these grievance studies papers is that like they think this is like this absurd thing that no one would ever believe. But like there's rigorous academic work that stands behind, a lot of the conclusions that they're drawing in jest, right?
Yeah.
And like, believe me, if you've ever known a social worker in your life, if you've ever known anyone who's done that kind of work, or anyone who's worked at an elementary school in a not wealthy part of the United States, and I know many people like that, you are desperately aware of the depths of human depravity in terms of how they treat their children.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the grievance studies thing, they're satirizing what they think of as like the leftist wokeism infected humanities academy, by submitting papers that treat subjects and talk about ideas that are actually, they think they take it for granted. For them, it's just obvious that these ideas are just ridiculous. They can just hold them up and say, look at this. And they think everybody right-minded will just agree with them and fall into place alongside them, laughing at them. And in their I was going to say their mountainous ignorance. It's one of, what it reminds me of? Another digression.
Mendacious.
another digression here, very brief, I promise, and then we'll get to the meat of this. A little while ago, we had the 200, 300, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, yeah, it would have been 300th anniversary of the publication of Frankenstein. And we had an article in one of our tabloid newspapers about how lefty snowflake socialist college professors and college lecturers who sympathize with pedophiles, etc., they've been teaching courses at university about how the monster in the book Frankenstein is sympathetic, is a victim of abuse and neglect.
Right.
And there's two explanations for this, right? These guys working at these tabloids, either they are so profoundly, mountainously, galactically ignorant that they just have no conception of what that book is about, what that's one of the most foundational cultural touchstones of Western civilization, right? They have no concept, even in the vaguest idea, of what it's actually about. And to them, it's just the monster, sympathetic, a victim of neglect and abuse. That's just inherently ridiculous. We can just say that and nobody's going to have, or they know and they're just lying to provoke exactly the reaction where loads of people say effectively what I've just been saying. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. This is what the grievance studies hoax amounts to ultimately. It amounts to, and probably this will only really resonate with listeners from my country. It's basically the same thing as fucking Sun journalism.
Yeah, I mean it's so 2 points there regarding Frankenstein. One, it was 200 years. It's 1818. It's when that book was published. Just
what did I say? Did I say 300?
You had said 300, yeah, but it is
numbers.
It's fine.
Never my strong point.
I have a STEM degree. That's the only reason I figured it out.
Well, there you go.
Nobody can solve that. Yeah,
I can tell you the themes. You can do the numbers. We've got it covered between.
Right, but the thing is, like, you don't even have to have read Frankenstein.
No, exactly. That's the point.
Like, you don't even have to have seen Frankenstein or seen, like, it's like one of the things that you just kind of know about Frankenstein is that, like, while he is often portrayed as a monster, while like he's in like quote unquote monster movies, he is also a sympathetic monster. And that's like the one thing people who don't know that the monster is Frankenstein's monster, they think that the monster is named Frankenstein, will nonetheless believe that there is some sympathy that we're supposed to have towards the monster.
Yeah,
like it's just fundamental to the thing. It's like saying, you're hiding the word Nazi by saying NSDAP or something like that.
Exactly.
I was convinced.
What does Arbeiter mean? I don't know what that means.
The National
And yet-
Socialist German something party. Gee,
Yeah.
what was that word? I can't imagine what it was.
You're talking about the NSDAP and you mean Nazi. That's very sneaky of you because I don't know what NSDAP means. And yet I feel able to comment on these issues. Jesus, fuck. Anyway.
Yeah. And I was going back and re-listening to that clip because I found that after we recorded that. And then I was re-listening to the episode. And I definitely kind of got into that headspace of like, oh no, you can tell he's fucking with us. Like that was a really clear moment for me of like, no, he's doing this on purpose. When he's like, I went and tap into my, like non-Google search engine. I mean, he's just like leaning into the trolling behavior on that. That was definitely a thing.
He's got him. If you do it that way, you got yourself covered either way because it'll work with all your potential audiences, won't it? The people that genuinely are as ignorant as that will go, oh, and they'll think you're right about the guy trying to be sneaky, and the people that aren't will appreciate that what they take to be the clever irony. And where have we encountered techniques like this before? Wow, I don't know.
Every fucking episode of this podcast. Ironically, Richard Spencer being one of the ones who does not do this behavior in the same way, except sometimes when he's talking to like mainstream media. That's the only time when he kind of fucks around with that. But yeah, so we could go on forever. Yeah. Anyway, our cold open today.
So welcome to episode 95.
Episode 95. Started 25 minutes.
IDSG.
Right, it's gonna be fine. So our cold open today was from Mark Lamont Hill's interview with James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. And we're going to have much more from that interview and certain people's Nazis commentary on that video. Probably in the next episode if I can get it prepped in time. Mm-hmm. But I did want to pull that out because like that little clip that he used, that little bit where he starts talking about like we're not allowed to say master slave drive in like computer systems anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it's because the woke left won't let us use master slave.
Is that because of like the master slave dialectic from Hegel, I expect? Is that where he's going with it?
Or I think I don't know. He might be going there. I think it's more like he's saying that like my understanding and like one of the things you run into is like these guys have their own kind of like special like they're like pet issues that they bring up on all of these like interviews. Where speaking of pets, I apologize, listeners, if you can hear very loud purring, but we have a guest who's very, very thrilled to be here. That is, I have my dog Ruthie is now in my lap, so I think we are a very happy, happy pet energy in our anti-Nazi podcast. How comfy can we make the talking about the most terrible people in the English speaking world? This is how comfy we try to make it. Anyway, so I started looking, I got curious because he's basically trying to make the thing. So my guess is that he found some news article of someone on some campus saying, we don't want to use master slave drive in terms of talking about hard drives anymore. We want to use, some other terminology because people find, and so there's like woke college kids on campuses having, going crazy, Tucker Carlson segment. So I did a little bit of Googling, it's now, admittedly, I didn't use a non-Google search engine, so I didn't get the heterodox results. So, who knows?
So you got the results via Google, which of course is, controlled.
But I did find an academic paper discussing, the actual background, and I'm going to link it to you on. I believe I have to give it to you on the. I would never recommend anyone use this Sci-Hub thing because you get all these great papers for free, and you don't have to pay the predatory companies. And that would be bad. So there will be a link which you definitely should not use.
No.
To go view this because it is very, very interesting, and you should definitely pay the $45 or whatever it costs to go read this paper. Anyway, this paper from an name Eglash. Sorry, I've got the paper from Ron Eglash, and this is not someone who has a great deep background in like this kind of terminology and this kind of history of technology stuff, but he does have a degree. He does have some training, and he does work as an engineer. And he went back and started looking at the history of where does this stuff come from. And there is a fascinating history going back to like the early 19th century. You know, he does reference Hegel's use, although the Hegel's use doesn't seem to kind of come like directly into describing this. And now I'm not going to go through this in detail, but people were kind of calling out the problematic indications of, you know, using this kind of terminology as early as like the late 19th century, when it was used to describe certain kinds of like clock mechanisms. This is not like new weird college kid stuff. No. And in fact, in this paper, he actually like interviews, or he sends like a survey out to a handful of his colleagues who work in the field and asks them, how do you feel about this? People who are who are people of color, African Americans, and he gets a variety of answers that are actually very thoughtful about like, actually, that metaphor did help me to learn this subject when I was first learning it. And I think it's probably valid in terms of its current use. And I think that we should approach it with sensitivity, but, all the way out to, no, this is really, it comes across as racist and it's discriminatory to students who are going to come in. A wide variety of opinions, very thoughtful opinions from people working in the field about this topic. And none of that gets included in James Lindsay's analysis ever, right? No. None of that ever comes forth and no, actually people have different opinions about this. And because I don't want to I don't want to lend myself to the idea that I'm blaming the woke college kids or whatever, because I know I'm kind of using the term. I have enormous respect for college students who speak up about their the problems that they have with the world around them. Even if I disagree specifically with whatever thing they're talking about, yes, please tell me how problematic I am, and we will deal with that. That's fine. That's the point.
Yeah. Contrary to myth, it is still very hard sometimes for people in that position to step up and say, actually, that this is a problematic use of language, etc., let alone practices, etc. in universities. It takes guts and it's difficult and it causes some problems, etc. because the universities are not just these hegemonic sort of totalitarian left-wing regimes of myth. And it's good that they have the guts to do that and that they do it a lot of and it's not about them being right all the time. Like anybody else, a lot of the time they're going to be wrong, or their ideas are going to be silly, or that's not the point. The point is these are discussions, but you don't get any of that from these people. What you get is just what we were talking about before, which is just the the knee jerk. This sounds silly to me. I will hold it up for general ridicule because obviously everybody who's right, i.e., thinks like me, will laugh along with me. It's just that again.
Right. And the whole thing also then kind of comes down to, we looked at the one comment or the one student protest or the one thing. We take one sentence completely out of context. Yeah. Forget to include the fact that nothing ever changed, or the silly, the one that sounds the silliest, or they make it sound the silliest. Now, one of my favorites of these, sorry, I'm again off topic, but Peter Thiel himself was one of these reactionary dipshit gas bags in the 90s. He wrote a book called The Diversity Myth. We covered this a bit in our one of our previous episodes. And one of his examples of woke college kids being crazy was table grapes. Right. It's because he went to school at Stanford, and there was this thing where you're not allowed to have table grapes at your, in your meetings or in the cafeteria hall. And, there was a student protest where, we're supposed to show solidarity to some farm workers or whatever. Right. But he keeps bringing this up as this completely silly, extraneous example.
Obviously ludicrous as that, I mean, come on.
And when you look at the actual thing that the students are saying, God, I have this in my notes somewhere. I might pull it up and try to put it in the show notes. But when you look at the actual thing, I'm going to get some of these details wrong, and I apologize. But this literally, the protest went back to the late 60s. It went back to an actual strike by farm workers, by unionized farm workers under Cesar Chavez in the 60s. This was not some hoity-toity liberal student. This was actually no, we are trying to do what we can to show solidarity with these actual striking farm workers, and who won great concessions in part because we participated in this project. So fuck you, Peter. They pull out these examples. It sounds ridiculous. What, table grapes? Who cares about fucking table grapes? the people who pick the grapes care about the table grapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Imagine how that works. So I'm really tired of reading scientific papers for this podcast. Let's dig into some science. Well, not even scientific, but let's dig into some papers and let's talk a little bit about these. Are not even real papers. These are all fake papers. But if you remember the history of the Grievance studies hoax, what the version that like Lindsay tells now is that when we first started writing these papers in August 2017, we were just doing like straight up hoaxes, and we were trying to get them into, these kind of respected academic journals, the same as the conceptual peanuts hoax. And then he says, and then we ran into this problem where by November we realized we just couldn't do that. We had to act that they actually do. The people running these journals actually do know enough about what's happening, about there is an actual substance matter enough that we can't just write silly hoaxes, that we have to do this sort of for real, right? Which completely invalidates the whole thing. If there is an actual subject matter, then
but don't let the fact that your own experiment disproves your opening thesis deter you in any way.
Right.
Don't let that change your plan in any way at all.
And then they move on to and I got this from some dipshit on Twitter the other day, where it was like responding to our episode 94 tweet and going something to the effect
I saw
of,
this was great,
something to the effect of, well, no, these are untrained people who know nothing about these subjects. They managed to get papers published. They wrote 20 of these papers. They got 4 of them published. Doesn't that show that it's a ridiculous field? And it's like, well, let's talk about that. We already covered that in episode 94. We already kind of covered all that in 94. Not in enough detail, though. So let's talk about some of the rest of these papers. But first, just to wet our whistle on for the quote unquote the good ones. Basically, I'm not going to read from any of the papers today. I'm just going to be reading reviewers' comments, and I did not have to pick and choose for these. This is, I keep saying this whenever we look into this. The links to all these papers in the reviewers' comments are in the show notes. Go download this Google directory. If they take it offline, I have it all. You can message me. I will send it. We can put it in many. This is the most hilarious shit in context. It really is. But so they write one paper,
and we're not cherry picking.
No, I am not. Like, ironically, when the Grievance hoaxers talk about the reviewers' comments, they have to cherry pick. Yeah, I don't have to cherry pick.
I mean, even solidarity with cherry pickers, obviously.
Well, obviously, the cherry.
Thank you, everybody. I'm here all night. It's fine. Sorry.
No. So they write a one of the like the last one that they said was actually just a straight up hoax. That everything after that had to be something like a real paper. Let me see if I've got that full title in front of me here. Sorry, one sec. I've got too many tabs open. All right. Grappling with hegemonic masculinity, the roles of masculinity and heteronormativity in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And they have these little like clever short titles that they put for all of these papers. This one is called either BJJ or BJ Gay, if you see what they did there. Right. So Lindsay even says, like, this is the one where we got this, where somebody actually just caught on to this is bullshit. And that was when we realized we couldn't do this anymore. I read the reviewers' comments, and I would like to share them with you now for this paper. This paper claims to apply a combination of psychoanalysis and feminism to examine and critique styles of masculinity evident within grappling-based martial arts subcultures. Overall, I found the paper very difficult to read and cannot recommend it for publication. This is due to a combination of factors, namely, and then this is now a bullet-pointed list. Okay. Mm-hmm. A densely theoretical, often confusing style of prose in many parts of the paper, an inconsistent application of theoretical concepts, most of which were not defined with any clarity for the reader, overuse of certain source material, as well as a fairly consistent tendency to misuse sources in support of claims that the paper's books in question do not actually support, many sweeping generalizations about all men involved in all grappling-based martial arts, a tokenistic inclusion of discussions of women in these spaces, which was not reconciled with the analysis in any meaningful way. A central thesis, which is not, to my knowledge, supported by any of the empirical research in this area, despite the fact that several such studies were cited in the paper. Bizarre, even farcical concluding recommendations, which indicate a lack of knowledge about the martial arts in question, as well as a tenuous and selective grasp of feminism as applied to sport. Next paragraph, and this it's almost done. There is simply too much wrong with the paper to offer a more robust criticism as a reviewer. I recommend that the author spends far more time acquainting themselves with both the theoretical and empirical literature at the intersection of sport, martial arts, and masculinity studies before attempting a rewrite. The current offering sits far short of the standards of scholarship expected of academic publication, particularly in a journal such as Men and Masculinities.
Right. So, premise, we can just make up any old crap that uses the right buzzwords and they'll publish it because that's how it works. Result, no, the people vetting it say, this is crap. It just uses buzzwords. We're not publishing it.
Right.
Conclusion, presumably, we'll just try again doing the same thing somewhere else and wait until we manage to trick somebody into publishing one and then go ahead with our point, despite the fact that it's not being supported by a lot of the case. Right. They basically just demonstrated that this paper is doing everything that they constantly accuse, feminist and woke academia of doing, and that was their reason why it's unpublishable.
Right, exactly.
The reviewer said,
right.
All this stuff that is supposed to be just endemic now within the academy, here it is, and that's why it's not publishable.
And they tried to they submitted this paper to several different journals, and all the reviewers' comments are all in this one document. But this was the one that Lindsay highlighted as well, now we have to actually sort of try, right? So that's the sort of the shit tier version of what they did with the very amusing comment. I don't know. I find that really hilarious that it's just,
especially when you remember that it's in academia speak. So it's
right.
It's studiously polite.
I mean, this is that's the thing you run into over and over again while reading these things, is that these people are very, very polite, and Lindsay et al. Take the politeness in terms of saying we think this is an excellent paper, although as we will now later learn, in many cases they say things like, this will require a major rewrite. Yeah And the term major rewrite appears over and over and over again. Anyway, we're going to get to that, but coming from the bottom of the barrel up to the top of the barrel, this is now friend of the pod, Sam Hoadley-Brill, has said that this paper that they wrote is actually the one he thinks this paper actually deserved to be published. And this is the one that they call Hoax on Hoaxes 2, because they had tried to do a parody version of this previously, and then they rewrote this significantly, and it was accepted but never published. But the title of this, and I've got it open in front of me, When the Joke is on You, a Feminist Perspective on How Positionality Influences Satire. They published this they attempted to publish it under a false name, Richard Baldwin. And Richard Baldwin at Gulf Coast State College is also, I believe, is also the name of the dog park paper and a couple other papers. So they kept reusing that name over and over again. But so this paper, I'm not going to read the abstract, but the idea, the way that they're kind of, they write a paper that kind of talks about the nature of satire, whether and how to use it in terms of power and positionality, right? So essentially it's, you can punch up but not punch down, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason they call it The Joke is on You is because one of the examples of bad scholarship or sort of bad satire that they use is the penis as a social construct. Right. Meaning they think it's hilarious that they wrote a paper calling themselves out for being really, really bad at satire, and then got it accepted in a high tier journal as well. So now,
well, one obvious One obvious fact, jumps. I mean, it was a really bad satire.
It was indeed, and I don't know. We can definitely. Part of the text here where they criticize themselves is because it sought to delegitimize gender studies, it is important to examine the motivations behind this hoax along with its epistemological assumptions. The positionality of its authors also matters. Its authors, too cisgendered, by the way. That's definitely something they should have caught when they were obviously, to cisgendered heterosexual white men who have formed deep commitments to the prevailing Western philosophical tradition. Quote, Lindsay is a mathematician, Boghossian a Socratic philosopher, and antipathy to social justice activism specifically targeted the academic left's moral architecture in general and the moral orthodoxy in general, in gender studies in particular, due to their dislike of the conclusions, implications, and activism emanating from gender studies. Specifically, these hoaxers revealed themselves as morally and epistemologically motivated against newer, established theoretical considerations of gender, race, and sexuality in favor of preserving and bolstering hegemonic scientific and meta-scientific narratives. These attitudes, however, are the deeply conservative and reactionary sentiments described by Friedel. That is accurate.
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. That is an accurate description of them.
And in other places, Lindsay will actually essentially admit this. It's, when we get to the New Discourses episode, he talks about this all the time. It's essentially a power struggle.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, not only is it an accurate description of them, I struggle to see what part of it they themselves would actually have an issue with.
Exactly. And so, also, you notice that in comparison to a lot of the other papers that we've read segments from, this is really clear writing.
Yeah.
Now, it's filled with references. It's filled with citations to the literature that kind of make it a little more difficult to kind of parse as an amateur. But you can read this paper. This is actually Hoadley Brill argues quite compellingly that this paper is good. This should have been published. It engages with the relevant literature. It discusses these things. It actually has a point. It's clearly written this is absolutely a paper that should have been published. And this is the one calling Lindsay and Boghossian complete dipshits. So I have included links to Holy Brill's tweets on this matter here in the show notes, but I would like to not to argue with Hoadley Brill here, who I assure you knows more about these topics than I ever will. But one of the reviewer comments speaks otherwise, and one of the difficulties here is that we don't have the different versions of these papers. We only have sort of the final version. However far they got in the process, they just kind of gave us the final version of it. So this would undoubtedly be referring to an earlier version of the paper, which who knows how jumbled and nonsensical it was. But
because as we talked about last time, they did not just send the first draft of what any old rubbish they wanted and get it published. They honed these things in response to criticism and requests for rewrites.
Right. I mean, essentially what they're doing in a lot of these cases is essentially just they send off a sort of incomplete version, which they then are told exactly how to correct the paper in order to get it into publishable condition, which is usually you need to integrate certain kinds of ideas into it. You need to, include better citation. You need to, and since they're just making all this up to begin with, all they have to do is then go into the relevant literature and pull topic sequences from abstracts, essentially, in terms of trying to understand kind of the basic, and they can get publications out of that, right?
Yeah.
Because
again, as we pointed out last time,
don't care. They're not actually trying to produce good scholarship.
No, exactly.
They're just trying to get over the minimum bar of publication so that they can shove egg in people's face, right?
Exactly. They're trying to commit fraud, and they're trying to get to the point where they're able to sell their fraud to these publishers. But as we talked about last time, that's what they've revealed is a banality, which is that the peer review process is bad at spotting frauds. Well, yeah, we knew that. It's not what it's for. Outright frauds where you just make up stuff. Yeah, it's not there to spot that.
Right. So here's the reviewer comment that I thought was particularly insightful here. And let me just make this obvious. This is Lindsay and Lindsay and Hoadley Brill do not agree on much, but they agree that this is their top tier paper. This is the one. Lindsay thinks this is the one that people should have paid more attention to, right? This is from the original reviewer comment. And there's a general theme of you're not integrating these ideas into a cohesive whole, in this particular reviewer comment. And it goes on much longer than this, but this is the nub.
Yep.
Another sign of lack of integration is that there is not clear definition of the comedic. The very first paragraph offers one too narrow for the essay. Northrop Frye provides some useful definitions of irony, parody, and satire in his classic work, Anatomy of Criticism. Note, too, that Cynthia Willett, in Irony in the Age of Empire, shares a similar thesis with this essay, namely that irony works against arrogance and ignorance. That source should be acknowledged even as the author discusses her own different approach. It might help the author clarify definitions of comedic and integrated argument. Yet another sign of lack of integration are the mixed references from Oliver to Dotson, Bailey et al. Oliver would support a strong postmodern or post-structuralist stance that would render claims to speak truth to power finally ironic, or that would yield to a very serious act of witnessing alterity. The latter group of epistemologists, including Dotson and Bailey, seem to affirm a pluralism, but also a truth that allows for objective claims. Humor that makes use of the latter approach would typically tend towards satire, not irony. Satire and irony just do not function the same way, and the author would want to decide which direction or use of them would most assist the argument. You have failed to do even a cursory glance at the actual citations that you are presenting in support of your argument. You do not understand the difference between irony, comedy, and satire.
Yeah.
You have not engaged in any way with the actual literature.
Yeah.
You don't understand what you're talking about.
I'm going to submit a paper about kitsch without reading Susan Sontag.
I'm going to write a paper about general relativity. Einstein who? Do you see what the pattern of these papers is going for yet? And do you see where this episode is basically going to, if this is not your cup of tea, you can cut this podcast off now, because they are all like this. They are all like this,
Yeah. There you have it. There's the abstract. Now into the actual paper, which will just be us mercilessly belaboring this same point over and over and over again and laughing at them. That's basically
indeed. So I do want to go through just 3 of these papers, and I know we're not even running long, but like this is a little dry, but I understand. I think it's important to kind of cover this at some point. So
I think this is great. I think this is hilarious. Please.
Okay.
This is one of the most fun I've had doing one of these in ages.
So they actually did get 3 papers that we have not discussed yet published. One of these is what they call fat bodybuilding, or the title is "Who Are They to Judge? Overcoming Anthropometry." It's almost as if these are like technical papers that have, it's almost as if these subjects have, jargon. Yeah,
I was going to say, I don't instantly know what that means, so obviously it's meaningless and ridiculous.
Exactly. This one is also written by quote unquote Richard Baldwin, but it is called "Who Are They to Judge? Overcoming Anthropometry Through Fat Bodybuilding." And this gets into fat studies and fat activism. And this is really gross. Like, this is like, once you start, because let me just say, I'm a fat guy, I am, and there is a lot of work in these fields in fat activism and fat studies to sort of change the way that we think about healthy bodies and what it means to be fat, and sort of the over medicalization of these things. And this is incredibly important, detailed work. And my issue is that because it is so because like using the term like overweight is so ingrained in our society, like I will just use it casually, even though that is not a term that we should be using in this context. And so I do ask for a little bit of leeway here. I was contacted by a fat activist of my acquaintance who does have relevant academic credentials in this field, did not want to be named, and so I will not name this person, but had read the paper and essentially told me that essentially what they're doing is they're suggesting in the paper, they're saying we need to create a bodybuilding competition that is for like non traditionally fit bodies, right? So then instead of being like about, like musculature and, agility, et cetera, it should be about, like people of different shaped bodies who, and like the very question of how we, what we think of as a fit body or a built body should be questioned. Now,
Questioned?
The person in my
question things. No,
the person in my DMs told me these things actually exist. Like this is actually a thing, which I'm aware of. I would also like highlight, and again, this, not to make it about something that isn't like the field, but we just had an Olympics, and Olympic athletes come in all shapes and sizes because there is no actual, like kind of fitness quotient. There is no like number you can put on fitness because it's ultimately, there are all sorts of trade-offs even among like super high level athletes.
A fitness quotient, imagine trying to put a number on fit. It'd be like trying to put some sort of definitive number on quantified intelligence or something. It'd just be ridiculous,
man.
How could you put a number and quantify something so abstract as intelligence or fitness? I mean, it's silly. What kind of idiot would believe something like that?
That said, also like if you just go Google like world's strongest man competitions, if you've ever seen those sorts of things, like some of these guys are, they look traditionally musculature, but certainly not all of them. And many of them basically look like giant guys with beer bellies who can lift a car. Now we can talk about what fitness means, and that's not necessarily what fitness means. And I completely, agree with that, but one of the things about like bodybuilding competitions, like, again, sorry, not to get like personal or not to get away from our main topic, but I actually knew somebody briefly. I worked with someone who was in training for weightlifting in the Olympics. I mean, this person was, I don't know exactly how far they got in that, they left that job, pretty quickly, but I worked with this person and chatted with them about like, so what is it like to be in the training for the Olympics, right? And they literally had to eat like a granola bar every 2 hours or their body would just start to shut down, because they are within like a hair breadth of a percentage body fat and, moisture. And, they have to have, protein moving through their body at like a very particular regimented weight. Like you live your life, you train for this thing for your entire, for like 10 years. And you train to the point to where like you are very good at doing this very, very specific thing for judges. And then you win a gold medal or whatever. And then like, that's your like greatest achievement in life. But that is not like fitness, like that is certainly not like a generalized fitness that you can like use in your day-to-day life. Now, don't get me wrong, this person was huge, absolutely could have beaten the shit out of me if it came down to it, right? But if you asked, let's go walk 10 miles, I can do that way better. So, and again,
fitness is about what's appropriate, as we know from evolutionary biology, from natural selection. Fittest doesn't mean, strongest and most muscular. It means the best suited for your niche, your evolutionary niche. It's not the same thing as being, it's obvious, really, if you think about it.
I mean, and another like classic,
you can be
example.
The fittest for being an Olympic shot putter. That's not going to stand you in good stead for other tasks in life,
Right. Another just classic example is there's one that's like Hugh Jackman in like the X-Men movies, and those like the early like Bryan Singer X-Men movies, right? Who had like the washboard abs and was just like that like classic, that guy looks like the fittest fucking person in the world. Well, in all of those shots, he's literally like within 10 minutes of like of dying of thirst because like they've just completely removed all water from his body. That's how you get that level of like abs. Like that's just how it works. People shooting those fight scenes shirtless they have to shoot, like 5 minutes at a time and then go like sitting down and rest and then get up and then like act like they're super fucking badass. Has nothing to do with like a realistic vision of,
And that look that Chris Evans gets in Captain America when he goes into the machine as the little weed, and then they open it up after the procedure, and he's this gigantic, ripped, washboard and massive pecs and everything. That look, that, I have respect for anybody who puts in the amount of work that it takes to make their, if you want your body to look that way, that's a lot of work and time and effort. And if you do that and you do it successfully, wow, fucking hell, good for you. I'm glad, you've achieved something amazing. And if you like it, that's great. But that is a relative and culturally specific idea. It's a socially constructed idea of what constitutes a fit, and it's not even in its original form. It's not to do with fitness. It goes back. It goes back to the early modern period. It goes back to the Renaissance. It goes back to Renaissance paintings. It goes back to Michelangelo and people like that. This ideal of the male body was constructed all those hundreds of years ago at the time of the birth of humanism in the Renaissance, and it's migrated down through like and advertising and so on through to modern movie making, where it's a visual signifier for super fitness, super ability, super heroism, etc., that you get in Hollywood movies. And one of the, by the way, just incidentally, and I'm not stigmatizing anybody that's a bodybuilder, but one of the cultural byways it took on the way was the absolute fetishism of that look by fascism in the early 20th century. When you look at fascist statuary, it's full of these mega ripped, because it's neoclassical. Fascist aesthetic is soaked in neoclassicalism. So my point is just that this is not to do with biology. This is to do, it's culturally, socially, and historically constructed as a signifier of fitness and strength, etc.
Exactly.
It's not unconnected to biology, but it is not itself just in some sort of blanket way what fitness looks like.
Absolutely. And I mean, like the you run into this, oh, sorry, God, we could talk about this forever.
I know.
You run into so many examples of, I went into, I have some upper respiratory issues. Jack has heard some of my coughs when when I have a fit in the middle of recording and have to just, all right, need to quit for a couple of hours because I'm not going to be able to talk for a while.
And I edit them out for you, listener. Don't
yes, very much so. There have been times we had to record, 2 days in a row, two days separately because I happened to get it to a fit in that moment. But I have some chronic upper respiratory thing. I went to a doctor for it, right before the pandemic started. And the very first thing that doctor said was, well, you just need to lose weight. That's the thing. Okay.
Yeah. But everything I've been to a doctor for in the last 20 years, the doctor had just said, lose weight, fuck off. That's basically every single time I've been to a doctor.
Exactly. That's the first thing they do. They look at you, they say, you're fat, lose weight, you'll feel better. Here's some vitamin D.
Actually, in case she's listening, that's not true of my current doctor, who's great.
Right. Sure. Not to stigmatize particular people or whatever, but like it is, I think any, good doctor will certainly recognize, hopefully will recognize that, this is a pervasive problem. And if you have a doctor who is not doing that, that's good for you. Please keep that doctor. You should probably not go into a U.S. style privatized health system.
No,
if you can avoid that, that would definitely be good for you. And again, the whole thing that we're doing here is indicating that the reviewers had significant reservations about these papers, right? And that they were significantly revised specifically to these specifications. So from the reviewer comment, for instance, statements like these, in order for fat to be seen as ordinary and familiar, we need to insert ourselves in the extraordinary and unfamiliar. Competitive bodybuilding venues may be unfamiliar, even intrinsically fat exclusionary, but this can change. And though it goes beyond the scope of this paper to provide more specific methods for institutionalizing fat bodybuilding, illustrate the issue with the paper. The author has highlighted the negative implication of fat stigma, but with a lack of connection to implementation. It negates the reason for why fat bodybuilding is a solution over other means or methods. This reader would encourage the author to improve the connection between fat bodybuilding and its role as a mean of fat activism. The author certainly has a wealth of information about the field of bodybuilding, and the author should use that experience to strengthen the connections mentioned previously. In the paper, they claim to have had 50 years of experience in bodybuilding, which was something that was pretty obviously meant to be like a red flag that the reviewer should have caught. They throw those kind of things into these papers so that they can then lord it over when the papers, when the reviewers don't catch those sorts of details. But as you can see from the comment, this is reading the paper saying you're not actually connecting the dots the way you should be. Your argument could definitely be stronger. But they're coming to a conclusion that is basically accurate, that, that what is a fit body is a socially constructed thing, and we should be asking real questions about that. Like on that level, there's nothing wrong with the paper. And that's the thing that they keep wanting to argue, is we got this published despite the fact that the conclusion we're drawing is obviously nonsense. But the conclusion is only obviously nonsense if you agree with James Lindsay and Boghossian's and Pluckrose's bigotry on this matter.
Yeah, if you're just a reflexive conservative with an allergy for questioning anything, and just an idea in your head that trying to change things through questioning and et cetera, is just inherently a ridiculous thing to do.
Indeed. All right, 2 more. You ready for this?
Yeah. I say that. I mean,
you say that, right?
I say that very confidently. Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah. I guess we'll see, won't we?
So I saved the sexy ones for last. Although the fat bodybuilding, don't want to imply that one is not also sexy. Definitely could be. It wasn't framed that way, but we're going to talk about the Hooters restaurant, and we're going to talk about dildos at the end. So
dildos, but I personally can't think of anything less sexy than a Hooters restaurant. There you go. I've never been to one, but
is that something you even have over there?
No, we don't have them in this country. But I know what they are, and I certainly, I'd rather chop bits of myself off than ever go into one, frankly. It's like strip clubs, I've never been to one, and I just couldn't, like, the idea of actually going to a strip club or something like a lap dance club or something, I literally don't know how. And it's not like prudishness or even it's nothing to do with the sex industry or even anything political. It's just the embarrassment reflex. I would just be so socially awkward in that situation. Just the idea of sitting sort of at a table while a woman in that Hooters restaurant uniform, I would just I couldn't cope with it.
I have known people who have worked in Hooters and in other kind of similar restaurants before, and it's they do not think kindly of the more ridiculous patrons. Let's just put it that way. But it's a job and people do it. It's
I've
fine.
No shade whatsoever on the people that work there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I personally, just in an environment that being quote unquote served by a waitress in that uniform, where everything around us both was just sort of loaded with this, you are here to titillate me thing. I would just be so embarrassed in that situation that I just
wouldn't. I am the kind of person who chooses, it's actually I know people who work as dancers and strippers. I know people who work in that industry,
and I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah, and I have. It's not my preference of how to get my jollies, but I do support a number of sex workers and through various means. I believe in paying for your porn, and I'm
pay your sex workers. Absolutely.
I am 100% on board with that. I simply don't care for that kind of environment, mostly because just I'm not even embarrassed about it. I have been in very sexual environments, but making it that openly transactional is something that I find deeply uncomfortable. It's I would rather
exactly
pay for a product that you make that I'm going to enjoy than to
I've never had a lap dance, but I've if I was in the situation somehow, if I ended up in that situation, it wouldn't be of my choosing. But if it was happening to me, I just wouldn't be able to help myself. I just sort of make eye contact with the person and just sort of say, what the fuck are we doing? Is this fucking balmy or what? What is this?
I just imagine you being cut this if you want to, it's fine. I just imagine you like being like Steve Carell in The Big Short in that one scene where it's like, tell me how many mortgages you have.
Probably. Is this place unionized?
That is actually a very good question. Anyway, okay, moving on. And
yes.
I hope that everyone agrees that we are in no way denigrating sex workers here.
Not at all.
James Lindsay definitely is exactly the kind of douchebag.
Yeah.
Right. So the title of this paper is The Restaurant as Pastiche Hegemony, Masculine Discourses of Objectification, Sexual Conquest, and Male Control at Hooters Restaurants. Mm-hmm. That's the title, okay?
This actually sounds potentially interesting as a subject, a feminist analysis of power dynamics in these sorts of institutions.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm interested in this.
No, absolutely. And, I did not read every word of this paper. This was the one where I just kind of skimmed through it. Because it's just you kind of know exactly where they're going with this, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to get an actual analysis. You're
not going to get anything real. But like the thing is, this actually was published, and they actually did get at something sort of interesting enough to reach the publication bias. And again, it just comes down to they decide they've come to like a ridiculous conclusion. The purpose, as they say in their Aereo magazine piece, so the thesis is that men frequent restaurants like Hooters because they are nostalgic for patriarchal dominance and enjoy being able to order attractive women around.
Well, that sounds plausible enough. I mean, isn't that just the whole point? I mean,
the environment that restaurants provide for facilitating this encourages men to identify sexual objectification and sexual conquest, along with masculine toughness and male dominance, with, quote, authentic masculinity. The data are clearly nonsense, and the conclusions drawn from it are unwarranted by it. NB, and this is what they literally say on the Aereo magazine piece. One reviewer did raise concerns about the rigor of the data. And then their purpose is, and this is where you really get to the key of it, to see if journals will publish papers that seek to problematize heterosexual men's attraction to women and will accept very shoddy qualitative methodology and ideologically motivated interpretations which support this. In other words, we're just dudes being dudes, and dudes like to see titties, and titties are at Hooters. And so, like, I'm going to eat the wings, and there's nothing, this is just natural behavior. This is just natural. This is just, these feminist studies, they're just problematizing something it's just a part of nature. They had Hooters in the Paleolithic era, don't you know? Like, they had the orange shorts and everything. We just, and it's just part of nature. That's all this is. It's all. This is what it is.
It's just natural. Yeah, that's why there are groups of humans who don't sexualize the female breasts at all. And actually, when Western observers go there to study them, and they tell them about how in the Western world, in the developed world, breasts are covered up, and men want to look at them, etc. These people laugh because they find the idea so ridiculous of the idea of the hidden female breasts as being something that men seek to look at for sexual. No, it's just universal. Men just, this is on the African savannah. We were doing this.
And of course, the question of, like why certain types of body types are, considered like conventionally attractive, and why that all of these things are part of a question of like, well, it turns out you've been, I will speak for myself as I have been advertised to with bodies that look like that from the day I was born. You see it every day of your life in every single like attitude towards, and so of course my sexuality has been tilted in the direction of that. And hey, going back to the fat bodybuilding, maybe having an appreciation for other types of bodies that are attractive in different shapes is actually a conduit for breaking out of that mold. Who would have thought so?
Just as it's not a narrow mechanical straight line from biological fitness to Chris Evans' body in Captain America, maybe, that's also socially and culturally and historically constructed over a long period. Maybe also the idea of what constitutes an attractive female. But, I was listening to a podcast I listened that's made by some friends of ours about the Bond movies recently. And they were talking about one of the Bond movies, that was my favorite when I was a kid. And out of sort of curiosity, listening to them talk about it, I went back to watch this movie that I haven't seen in a couple of thousand years, but I used to love when I was 10 or whatever. And the way in which female attractiveness and female sexuality and the relationship between men and women and what men and women are supposed to mean to each other and what men are supposed to find attractive and how men are supposed to dominate women sexually. And so in that movie, that was being fed to me when I was a kid. That had no effect. It's just biology. No. So, and Hooters restaurants and stuff like that, that's not just about men wanting to. Yes, okay, men want to look at women's bodies because they find them attractive. Yeah, you can do that at home now. You can switch your fucking computer on in 2 seconds. You can be looking at whatever you want, right? That if you want to go to a quote unquote restaurant, there's something else going on there that requires explanation. It does require explanation. There is a social dynamic there. You want that very thing I was talking about not being able to do because I would find it socially awkward and weird. And, men want to do that. They want to sit there and be served by women in uniforms that emphasize certain physical. There is something there that requires an extra explanation. It's not just dudes being dudes and wanting to look at titty. Yes, we do need to ask these questions, but to these fucking ignoramus reactionary Philistines, just asking the question apparently is illegitimate and silly.
Exactly. I mean, and on that matter, I mean, again, we're getting into two straight-ish, white men in their middle age should not be talking about this much about sex work. No. But I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that. In many ways, the actual strip club experience, depending on where you work, kind of what the circumstances are around it, is often much more honest and much more. It is a much healthier environment than the actual restaurants are, despite the fact that there's actual because it's the implicit becomes explicit in a certain way, and you're not working under this kind of this haze of intent, right? Yeah.
Talk about a lab in which to study intersections of capitalism and patriarchy and why. Yeah, let's study it. Why just jeer it instinctively at the concept of studying this and questioning it? No, let's study this.
The Smoking Gun had the Hooters, a Hooters employment manual. At one point, I may try to dig that up and put it in the show notes. Saw that because it's eye opening. It's eye opening. So. So much here. All right.
Was it dildos next? I think.
Well, I haven't even read the Hooters reviewer comment.
Okay, sorry. I'm racing as always. I'm racing.
You're racing to the dildo.
You know me, everybody.
The title of that one is "In Through the Back Door." Just to wet your back door for where we're going with this.
Okay.
But, all right. We should read this reviewer comment because it just takes the cake here. All right. So this is from the editor who actually recruited 2 reviewers. And then the 2 reviewers kind of disagreed. There were arguments back and forth about the nature of the paper and sort of its methodology. So then the editor brought in a 3rd reviewer who looked more closely at kind of what everybody had to say. And so this is written by the editor in the reviewer comments in terms of kind of describing where the reviewer comments are coming from. This then takes me to a core challenge in moving forward with your paper at Sex Roles: trustworthiness. Okay. All right. All 3 reviewers share my concern about the lack of demonstrated methodological integrity in the present paper. This is where reviewer 3 comes in. I recruited reviewer 3 after the other reviewers, and because she is a member of our in-house staff, I shared both reviewers' masked comments with her. I asked her first if she felt there was enough evidence of rigor to pursue a revision. Because we, at this point, have incomplete methodological information, I cannot commit to making a positive judgment here, but I am committing to giving it a try. Thus, my second challenge to reviewer 3 was to outline what next steps you will need to take in addition to addressing the other reviewers' comments to fill in these methodological gaps. As you can see from reviewer 3's comments, this starts by laying out your procedural details and analytic strategy. My guess is that you will need to focus more specifically on theme development and justification, e.g. thematic analysis, rather than taking this aspect from the grounded theory and that your goal is not to develop theory. I have attached a recently published paper in Sex Roles by Sherry Chatfield that lays out various approaches to qualitative methodologies and outlines our standards here at Sex Roles. My expectation is that reviewer 3's comments in this paper will help you address this critical point, as well as to move one from there to fully flesh out your methods, analysis, and findings. This is not like somebody questioned our data. This is literally every person who looked at this had fundamental questions about the very nature of what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
I would love to see the various actually like revised versions of this paper. I want to see how bad the initial version was, right?
Yeah. This sounds like, again, it's polite academic speak for, do you actually know how to do this? Here's a book you could read about how you actually do these things.
Are you actually a mental 14-year-old boy who wants to write about Hooters? Because it kind of sounds like that's what you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really should, like, if we really wanted to laugh at this some more, I could read like their selected reviewer comments that they put, the glowing, the reviewers and I were positive about many aspects of the manuscript, and we believe that it can make an important contribution to the field.
Once you've gone away and learned how to actually conduct studies and then done some,
Indeed. So, dildo paper. Then we're gonna
finally.
All right, finally. The title, Going In Through the Back Door, Challenging Straight Male Homohysteria and Transphobia Through Receptive Penetrative Sex Toy Use.
Right.
Do you see where this is going?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think I have an inkling. Yeah.
Thesis. That it is suspicious that men rarely anally self-penetrate using sex toys, and this is probably due to a fear of being thought homosexual, homohysteria, and bigotry against trans people, transphobia. It combines these ideas into a novel concept of transhysteria, which was suggested by one of the paper's peer reviewers. Encouraging them to engage in receptive, penetrative anal eroticism will decrease transphobia and increase feminist values. The stated purpose, to see if journals will accept ludicrous arguments if they support unfalsifiable claims that common and harmless sexual choices made by straight men are actually homophobic, transphobic, and anti-feminist. So the paper looks at, lots of cis straight dudes. They've never experienced anal pleasure, and maybe that's correlated with, homophobia. And transphobia, etc. And maybe learning to explore that kind of pleasure might teach people there's nothing to actually fear from this and decrease, homophobia, etc. That's and now
again, doesn't immediately sound all that implausible to me. I mean,
I tried to spend some time. Yeah, the thing is that this kind of stuff is almost impossible to study empirically, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be aware of, like, in the 90s, there were some papers that, claimed to study, blood flow in the genital region of, cis men who were both, who either, had homophobic tendencies or did not, or had lesser homophobic tendencies, and found, there's more blood flow happening with the homophobes, and therefore this is all like suppressed homophobia. And my understanding is that, like, that kind of hypothesizing has been much beaten down over the course of the last few decades.
My understanding is that that's been largely debunked and is now widely understood that theorizing is now widely suspected, at least
right.
Let's say, to itself be homophobic.
Right. I think that, from trying to just kind of peruse Google Scholar for a few minutes, I kind of got the sense that, it's probably not complete bunk, but like the original study has been much superseded.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to get reliable data on this because, like, bringing people into a room and putting electrodes on their junk and, trying to measure fluid response in a laboratory setting, you're not going to get anything like natural results, and nobody like self-reports on this stuff. And, it's just, it's a very, very difficult field. And so
there's a rush to over theorize and over generalize on the basis of results. And stuff.
And that's something that happens all the time in just kind of psychology in general.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to, this is a very, very difficult research. It can be done very badly. It can be done well. Everything is provisional, et cetera, et cetera. In any case, the idea that, like, putting a toy in a place that you find, like, kind of uncomfortable, and maybe you'll find that you enjoy it. That's something that happens all the fucking time. Right? Not to discuss any particular person's feelings about anything in particular, like this is not about anybody's sex life who happens to be talking on this podcast for or against, but, like, there are, again, ask any, sex worker, particularly in-person sex worker, and, like, the idea of, like, a lot of men who act real tough and homophobic and, we're going to beat them gays down in public really want to be touched where the sun don't shine. It's not at all uncommon.
Yeah. There are lots of windows into the private realms of, the private sexual realms of people of all types, and everything happens, everything goes on, and it goes on all the time. This is what we know. People just we're bonobos, and we do it all. We do it all. Whatever it is, somebody's doing it within reason.
And sometimes outside of reason.
Yeah.
Anyway, this one, I saved this one for last, both because it involves dildos, but also because it's
got to build to a climax.
Got to build to a climax. There's only one way to do that.
We've been edging long enough. Let's get there.
But also, this one really takes the cake. Okay. In the opening sections, the author notes that though Allen lays out psychoanalytic theoretical considerations that are strongly suggestive of the co-constitutive relationship between masculinity, the variables listed above, and anality, currently there is no scholarly literature that engages the topic of straight male penetrative sex toy directly and substantively. The author here is referring to Allen's article, Phallic Effect, although Allen's book, Reading from Behind, a cultural analysis of the anus from 2016, might prove to be more useful in the context of this study. In other words,
again, go read the basic literature on this subject.
They quote one guy, they quote one researcher in one paper, because presumably they found some funny line. It's a line that they thought was funny that they could put into it. And the reviewer says, no, you really should have read this other book. The other book by the author you cited, that's much more on point for the actual thing you're talking about. I think that's amazing. Anyway, this does continue.
This is like, somebody submitting an article. I'm translating it into my home language.
Right.
This is like somebody submitting an article to, historical materialism journal, and their thesis is based on a quote from a Phil Greaves tweet. And the peer review process on the editorial board says, yeah, you might want to have a look at Gramsci. I don't know. It's a thought.
Or it's based on a PragerU quote from Gramsci, citation PragerU episode 503. And it's like, you should probably read the prison notebooks, right?
Yeah. Or just Gramsci for beginners. It's great. It's got cartoons. It'll be fine.
The cartoon there. The cartoon version of Gramsci. All right.
They do those.
This goes even further, right? The author writes that there exists a far more extensive and applicable treatment in the book, The Ultimate Guide to Prostate Pleasure, but unfortunately this insightful volume falls considerably outside the scholarly academic canon. The reviewer again, I'm not certain that this is a problem. Perhaps this is a difference of approach, but it seems to me that sex manuals are highly valuable resources in scholarly work, and if there is a problem, that the problem rests not with the ultimate guide, but the Academy's inability to imagine value outside of itself. Indeed, the author might consider expanding this to include books like The Adventurer's Couple's Guide to Strap-on Sex by Violet Blue. Now, I
love this.
It goes on, you can read the whole thing. It's all linked. So what I love about this is the reviewer is literally making cogent criticisms of the way that the Academy treats popular sex manuals.
Yes.
Right?
So far from being this closed shop where all you have to do is submit orthodoxy, and the Academy says, like a load of nodding dogs, yes, this meets our ideological criteria, so we'll publish it. What you actually get back is, actually, the Academy is fucking useless on this subject. Go and read these sex manuals.
Yeah, go and read Violet Blue. It's better than a lot of the stuff that you're going to see in this fucking journal. That's almost literally what is being said by that reviewer. Brilliant. That is amazing. That is just astonishing.
Yeah. That gives you hope. It almost gives you hope.
It is like this, it is this moment. It is this just such a little thing of the author, the fictional author of the paper, right? Mm-hmm. So Lindsay is putting himself, or whoever wrote whichever one of the three or what combination. So Lindsay is putting himself in the mind of this thing, going well, yeah, I could talk about the pervert's guide to anal sex, but nobody's going to want to, cite that in the academia. This is just me being ridiculous and going yeah, this sex manual is going to be a good source, but of course we can't use that in proper academic research. and the academic who actually does this for a living to the point that they are like cited, reviewers from this journal is saying, no, actually, that's good. And actually, yes, no, you should feel free to do that more often. And if the problem is, it's the problem with the academia. Again, I'm repeating what we just said, but like Lindsay is claiming that he knows these subjects better than anybody. And he's putting in these like joking references that to him are just like completely absurd, that like an off-the-shelf sex manual could have any like value at all. And the actual noted expert is going like, yeah, check out Violet Blue. It's great.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Because he, ultimately he's an ignorant, closed-minded Philistine ideologue, and he's coming up against people who, for whatever the faults of bourgeois academia, there are some genuinely questioning, thoughtful, imaginative people who are trying to understand the world in there, unlike him.
Indeed. And if we were going to play some clips, and if I'd managed to like prep this ahead of time and we weren't running way up against our like hard and finish time, I would absolutely have pulled up the long chat that he had with quote unquote Dr. Deborah So. Oh my God, we're gonna have to do an episode about her. It's just what a fucking piece of work. Actively works with Helen Pluckrose's thing, Counterweight. She's a sexologist who's like, anyway, they had like an hour-long conversation mostly about polyamory. And let's just say they're against it.
Well, you shock me.
And it really is. It really is just like listening to these, like, I mean, it's one thing when like the Nazis just don't get it, or like, but listening to these like sort of reactionary, like kind of reasonable types who get to like show their faces in cocktail parties, talk about sex is particularly polyamory. Like people just lose their fucking minds over the idea that people can love more than one person. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So
these champions of the Western classical tradition. The Romans had paintings of people being fucked by bulls all over their walls. Come on, you don't know anything about the tradition you claim to be championing.
All right, that's it. We
okay.
End with fucking bulls. That's where we end on this podcast.
Well, like all the best things do.
I hope we have been taken with the spirit in which this was intended. By the way, we never intended to insult anyone or to speak against any sex workers of any kind. I mean, just to highlight that once again before we wrap up, we've been treating this lightly, but this kind of like Lindsay's bullshit, and the kind of like this is a microcosm of like very real damage that is being done to very real people, right? Yes, and.
Yes.
However prestigious you think these journals are, and however prestigious they actually are, I'm not going to judge, whatever. Lindsay has hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers. He gets quoted. He has been on every like YouTube reactionary show imaginable. He is speaking at GOP conventions. He is a huge, huge figure within actual like political culture. He is building a name for himself. Ditto for Boghossian and Pluckrose and all of these people who have done enormous material harm to the world through the kind of bigotry that led them to write these papers. So the reason we go through the papers is, or at least the reviewer comments, is yes, it's funny. And it's funny to see what they say about these things versus what's actually said, right? It's worthwhile to go into the details, but we can't lose track of the kind of the background fact here that this is having materially negative effects in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This guy's making a career for himself, validating the bigoted intuitions of people who don't know anything and just want those bigoted intuitions validated. That's basically his job now. Yes, your guess about what's wrong with the world and all these people you don't like, it's right, and I can tell you that with my patina of academic respectability, I can tell you, yes, all your knee-jerk assumptions about what you don't like and who you don't like, they're all right. They're all absolutely correct. Pay me. That's basically his job now, and it's despicable and it is harmful. And I hope, if you have criticisms of what we've said or our tone or anything, get in touch. We will take them seriously. I hope this comes across in the way it is meant, which is that we are I'm totally on the side of workers, including sex workers, and we are laughing, but we are not laughing at you. We are laughing at them. We are laughing at them with you. I hope that is certainly how I mean it. So
absolutely, just want to make sure that yes, we do. No,
it's worth stressing.
We do approach this with humor, but it is not meant to be the sort of the juvenile humor of like we're talking about dildos. Isn't that great? No. Like ha 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 or whatever.
We know this isn't a trivial issue.
Right. Absolutely. And
these are trivial people meddling in important issues.
Right. And doing, again, real damage to real people in the process. Yeah. Which, that's what we're here to combat. And solidarity with sex workers,
Absolutely.
And academics doing important theoretical work and empirical work to combat these people.
The people picking the grapes and all of them, everybody.
I mean, one of the things, sorry, we're wrapping up here, but I did just want to highlight one more thing. Is like one of the reasons I wanted to go through the reviewer comments in particular is because these are the people whose voices got left out of the like media narrative on this.
Yeah, because it's inconvenient, because it just completely explodes the Lindsay Pluckrose Boghossian narrative of what actually happened.
Right. Like Lindsay, Pluckrose, and Boghossian get to go out and kind of tell their version. And even in critical accounts, it's sort of like, well, did you really, like there's no kind of interrogation of their kind of basic framing of like, we wrote these papers and they gave us positive reviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When, I believe I mentioned this in the last episode, there were Twitter threads at the time of people who were like, oh yeah, I was a reviewer on that paper and boy, it was a bunch of bullshit, And so like trying to, obviously these reviewers are all anonymous. And so if you were one of these reviewers, I would love to, and you have comments on this, please message me, my email address and DMs, etc. And like, let me know. I would love to hear from you. If you any of these papers. And
anonymity assured, if that's what you want.
Right. And if you want to make a statement, we can read it on a future episode, or we can do something with that for sure.
Absolutely.
So please let me know, because this is the voice that got left out of that story, right? There were people, even if you say the journals themselves were negligent, there were reviewers calling out like major problems with these papers, and almost universally in every single one, Like this was not something where they did like a clever hoax and like fooled everybody. Like people were pointing out the problems here, and that's we did 4 hours on this material and summed it up in a sentence.
This is the problem you always have, isn't it? They can spew out misleading bullshit at 200 times the rate that it can be debunked. For every minute's worth of misleading bullshit that these people just carelessly spew into the world, other people have to spend hours upon hours and upon hours researching it and debunking it and pointing out why it's crap.
Right.
But,
indeed.
Hopefully we've done our little bit towards doing that. Read the Grievance Studies hoax. Certainly hope so.
Hope so, for sure.
Okay.
All right.
Great. That's another episode done. And listen to the next one. It'll be good.
Hopefully.
Yeah. No, it will. It will. They're always good. Have more confidence in yourself, Daniel, honestly. That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.